bad human behavior will lead to bad events. And you can't legislate against bad human behavior because that's just basically part of our culture, unfortunately.
The Enron situation brought out this "I didn't know." And so, Congress didn't want to hear that again, and they've got this "I should have known." Well, that's a very strange standard, that I should have known.
The changes are going to occur not because there's some new dandy system out there to help companies magically comply.
You should implement as much as you can of Sarbanes-Oxley and sub-certification and certification processes now.
Here in the United States, we're all familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley and its compliance ramifications. From a technology standpoint, if we're not making the right IT investment, if we're not looking at open standards, if we're not leveraging our IT resources or looking at security, we can't provide a big picture of how we got from point A to point Z. Auditing and reporting your reserves and production numbers means going back to source data to report whole workflow. Time is money, and in the world of compliance, delayed notification can cost you big. And as we're seeing in some cases, end up in criminal prosecution. Welcome to World Energy Television. I'm Roger Smith. This program in the World Energy Leadership Series focuses on the issues of compliance and the impact it could have on the energy industry. Joining us in the studio today are John Gibson, President and CEO of Paradigm; Lane Sloan, Chairman of the Greater Houston Energy Collaborative and also author of Terra Incognita, a navigation aid for energy leaders; David Johnson, Energy Practice Leader of Protiviti; and joining us via satellite for this program is Matt Simmons, the Chairman of Simmons & Company International. So let's get started, gentlemen. And in reference to Sarbanes-Oxley, what is your overall impression of this legislation currently? And we'll start with Matt Simmons.
Sarbanes-Oxley was a Band-Aid piece of legislation that was slapped together in the aftermath of Enron and the tragedy that befell Enron. And it created another tragedy. From all the boards that I monitor, from the handful of boards I'm on, including not-for-profit boards, they're 4 times less efficient now because of Sarbanes-Oxley. We're spending most of our time now in board meetings actually running through lists of compliance issues, and once in a while we have enough time left to talk about the strategic direction of these institutions. And when I saw that spread to some of the best not-for-profits that don't even have any public shareholders, it's just board members don't want to get sued, I said that's the worst piece of legislation that we've probably ever had.
David, what's your take?
I don't subscribe to the theory that it failed to do anything good. I agree that it was put together very rapidly, and because of that, we got a lot of unintended consequences. I think Section 404, which is the section that people have the most problems with dealing with all of the control issues and the control opinions that everybody has to issue, has caused the most problems. And in the implementation of that, everybody went to every individual process control within the lowest levels of the company. Truth be told, I think people are concerned about the theft of petty cash. It just doesn't matter when you're talking in the scope and scale of investments in organizations and what's happening. And I think too much focus got placed on individual transactional controls and not so much on the key issues that matter.
Okay. Lane?
Well, I think any time that you've got something that's this severe, such as Enron or WorldCom, you're going to get some reaction, and the legislators had to deal with it. The public expected something to occur, and when that does occur, it's going to be too stringent. And over time, it's going to wind itself back. I think the Public Audit Oversight Committee has already made recommendations to change that and focus more on the big risks, which is really where we ought to be looking. Secondly, the SEC is starting to look at that. My understanding, they voted for it. So it'll cycle back. But I think, the conditions were such that, folks felt they had to do something. And so we went too far one way. Now we're moving back.
The pendulum did swing pretty hard. In May of 2007, the SEC and the PCAOB did kind of finalize some of their guidance to ease some of the compliance issues and some of the issues that companies were having to deal with that were really bogging them down from a compliance perspective.
John, what's your take?
Again, I agree with Matt. I think that it's taken boards to the point where they spend 90% of their time on compliance, that even management, we spend a lot of time looking at reporting. I think we've lost focus on the business in this country. overall, that people are not as focused on the operational issues and the strategic issues. We're spending a tremendous amount of time on compliance.
Don't you think that's the reason for a lot of the privatization that's going on, John?
No question. The private equity market is the group, and I think Lane's hit right upon the core of what's happening. The government's driven a lot of the smaller companies and larger ones we're seeing now to move back to private equity where they can come out from under this kind of reporting. And it's not because this kind of reporting is onerous, and just because it's onerous, but there's so much liability associated with it. Even with the best of intentions and really high integrity management, there's tremendous fear that you've missed some piece of minutia in a particular country or activity, or something will go wrong to which you'll be held accountable as a result of this type of legislation. It's very difficult.
The process has gotten a lot of attention, but I think you're right. It's the liability issues that weigh on people quite heavily.
It's more than liability. I mean, it's criminal jail time, and I think
exactly.
This is the thing that's really kind of a tough standard. You know, the Enron situation brought out this I didn't know. And so, you know, Congress didn't want to hear that again, and they've got this I should have known. Well, that's a very strange standard, that I should have known. And, you know, particularly for criminal liability, and that's where we're at. And I think, you know, it's put the fear of God. Bill Grahey, in this Terra Incognita book, you know, we had a lot of CEOs we interviewed, and it was exactly what John's saying. You know, all the board members are just paranoid now. And so the focus is not on where should the business be going. The focus is on who's doing what.
Every time I go to sign that piece of paper today, I'm in a private setting today, and I'm practicing Sarbanes-Oxley with the private company in order to be prepared to go public, which is a different point. Today, if you are private and you have any possible future that has being a public company, you should implement as much as you can of Sarbanes-Oxley and sub-certification and certification processes now, because you can't just flip the switch the day that you're public, and you're going to need as much possible lead time that you can get. This is very difficult to do with a company that hasn't had the processes in place. It's difficult to do if you acquire an international company that didn't have these processes. And so when you go to sign that piece of paper, the first thing in your mind is how much criminal and civil liability am I taking on, both in a corporate setting as well as in a personal setting. I think that people of integrity have a difficult time signing that sheet of paper. People with no integrity lied to you before, and they're signing that piece of paper now.
Okay, let's bring in Matt Simmons. Matt, does the market reward or value companies that comply with Sarbanes-Oxley requirements more than the ones that don't comply?
I don't think the market has a clue, other than when they see a company being slapped with another fine. And sometimes the fines are actually the most stupid fines as a result. So I think there's the companies the market applauds are the companies that are basically didn't ever need Sarbanes-Oxley, that have fabulous culture, that have done that aren't getting fined every 2 or 3 weeks. Those are the companies that are most highly valued in the market, and they always have been and always will be.
Okay, next up we'll go inside the numbers and talk about how to keep track of the data, how much is too much, and the cost of complying with Sarbanes-Oxley. Stay with us. You're watching World Energy Television.